Hey guys, today I'm gonna explain what if Naruto and Sasuke meet Indra ASHURA Madara and hashirama early part 2. So let's start. Sasuke and Naruto sat side by side in their academy classroom. The two were writing in their notebooks and trying to ignore the questioning looks of the other students. They were all supposed to be copying notes from the board. However, Naruto was finding it hard to concentrate. Asura and Hashirama had quickly learned that the boy was a kinesthetic learner, so what they would do is have Naruto imagine himself doing the things that were in the problems, and help him visualize them by explaining it a bit better to figure out the answers. This not only helped the boy learn, but Naruto himself found it fun to imagine himself throwing a kunai or shuriken or whatever the problem was about. Time went by and soon the lesson was over and it was time for lunch. The children all hurried outside to eat and play with their friends. Naruto was no exception. He ran out excitedly, turning back to see Sasuke walking at a calmer pace behind him. "Come on Sasuke, hurry up, or we'll lose our spot," he called, grinning ear to ear at the thought of being able to play with his best friend during lunchtime. Sasuke snorted, "I doubt anyone's going to take our spot from us Yujira Tonkachi," he replied calmly. They walked over and sat down under a big tree in the yard. Naruto brought out the lunch that Sasuke had packed for him this morning and opened it. Rice, salted salmon, miniature sausages and lettuce. Looking over at Sasuke's lunch, Naruto saw that he had rice, mini hamburg patties, sliced cucumber and cherry tomatoes for lunch. "Hey, thanks for making lunch for me this morning Sasuke, I should learn how to as well, so we can take turns same with dinner," Naruto said gratefully. He'd never had a bento box before. He'd always just gone to a Chiraku's if he had enough money during lunchtime, so this was a new experience for him. Let's just eat before lunch is over," Sasuke replied, turning his head away to hide his faint blush. He was never good at accepting other people's gratitude. The two ate quietly, watching the wind rustle the leaves of the trees. Suddenly Naruto's keen ears picked up a commotion nearby. Getting up and walking over to where the noise was coming from, the Uzumaki peered around a corner and bristled at what he saw. 3 older boys from a higher grade were standing around a small girl. He wanted to rush over there right that moment, but Hashirama stopped him. "Wait Naruto-kun, let's just see what happens first. After all, someone could come and stop them before we even have to do a thing," the former Hokage said. Naruto thought about it for a moment then nodded, "All right, but if things get too out of hand, I'm going over there," he whispered back. Then he stood and listened to what they were saying. "Hey, look at her eyes, you're one of those Hyuga, aren't ya?" One asked. "Yeah, your cousin is in my class, and he's all stuck up," another replied. The third boy bent over the small girl. "I bet you're just like the rest of your clan, a stuck-up princess that thinks you're better than the rest of us," he sneered. The girl trembled. "No, I'm not like that." "Ah." She tried to defend herself, but the main boy grabbed her head and roughly pushed her down to her hands and knees. "Apologize for bumping into me and making me spill my food," the main boy, who was fairly chubby, demanded. The girl trembled. "I'm sorry," she whimpered. The boy pushed her head down further. "What was that? Say it louder." I'm sorry, she cried softly, beginning to sob. Naruto felt his rage take over. "Okay, that does it," he thought, running out to where the boys and girl were. "Hey, assholes. She said she was sorry, so just leave her alone already," he demanded, glaring fiercely at the 3. The boys turned to look at who was behind them, only to see a weak-looking blonde kid wearing a dark blue yukata standing there. The main boy scowled. "Get lost brat, we're busy," he said dismissively, as he turned back to the girl again. Naruto scowled at being ignored and the way they were treating the girl. He knew Hashirama and Asura had told him that it was better to avoid conflict as much as possible, but those assholes were just asking for it. Asura nodded. "All right, do what you have to do after all. There are some people that are just bullies, plain and simple, and need to be taught a lesson about picking on people weaker than them. Besides, you'd be protecting someone by doing it Naruto-kun," he agreed. Naruto again called out. "Hey, instead of picking on a small girl who's not able to defend herself, why don't you try taking me on unless you lot are too scared to try?" At that, 2 of the boys ran right at the blonde. Naruto stood still and braced himself. Wait now," Hashirama instructed, just as one of the older boys was about to land a punch on him. Naruto swiftly moved to the side and ducked under the second punch thrown by his friend. The blonde ducked and weaved, occasionally deflecting a hit here or there. Eventually the bullies began to get tired from overexerting themselves to try and beat Naruto up, while the Uzumaki's movements, as instructed by Asura, had been swift and short to conserve his energy. Even though he had much larger chakra reserves than most people, Hashirama had instructed the boy on the dangers of chakra exhaustion and explained that it would be better in the long run to save as much energy as possible. The two boys who had been attacking the blonde slowly slumped to the ground from exhaustion. The leader of the group, who had stood back next to Hinata to make sure the girl hadn't tried to run away, glared at his friends. "You weaklings. You know he's the deadliest of the academy, right?" he demanded, angry that they hadn't been able to beat the weakling within 2 seconds. Naruto glared. Even though all three of these boys had been tormenting that girl, that didn't mean that he approved of the way this bastard treated his own friends. "Hey," he called again, as he began walking over to him with purposeful steps. "I don't like people who abandon their friends whether they lose their supposed value, or at all," he said, face stormy. "People like you don't deserve to call yourselves shinobi." He paused when he was face to face with the now sweating boy. He was releasing a lot of killing intent subconsciously because of his anger. Naruto leaned over close to the boy's ear. "Now get out of my sight, you scumbag, and take your friends with you," he whispered harshly. The kid took off running, while his friends finally managed to pick themselves up off the ground and followed after their leader. Naruto's eyes softened as he turned and walked back over to the still whimpering Hyuga heiress. He knelt down in front of her and studied the girl with slight worry in his eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked gently, brushing some of the girl's hair behind her ear as she looked up at him with teary eyes. "Why yes, thank you," the girl sniffed. Naruto took a tissue out of his pocket and offered it to her. "It's no problem, I never liked people like that. Especially when they pick on someone just for being themselves," he explained, as she wiped her eyes. "I'm sorry, I never introduced myself, did I?" he asked, as he gave her his hand and helped her up as he stood. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki," he said with a beaming grin. The Hyuga smiled shyly, tears now mostly dry. I'm Hinata, Hyuga," she replied, handing the blonde back his tissue. Naruto nodded. "Hinata," he said, testing the name out, before smiling again. "I like it. Hey, Hinata-chan. You wanna come have lunch with me and Sasuke?" he asked. The shy girl blushed, and nodded. Hi, Naruto-kun, she replied. The two then headed back over to where Sasuke sat, looking around and wondering where Naruto went. When the Uchiha saw Naruto walking with Hinata, he scowled slightly, but managed to keep a straight face. "Who's this Naruto?" he asked the blonde boy, who scratched the back of his head slightly. "This is Hinata Hyuga. Some boys were picking on her before I scared him off and I offered to let her sit with us since she still looked a little upset and I was worried those idiots would try something again if she went off on her own," he explained. Naruto narrowed his eyes slightly. "That's okay, right?" he asked with just the slightest hint of warning in his voice. Sasuke tilted his head to the side and studied Hinata silently for a moment. The shy girl shifted and moved slightly behind the blonde, before Sasuke nodded in acceptance. "That's fine, Hinata. Do you want to sit here?" he asked, moving over slightly, so the girl could sit on his other side in the shade of the tree. Hi, thank you Sasuke-san, she replied nervously, moving to sit in the offered spot, before taking her lunch out of her bag. The three ate quietly together for the rest of the lunch break. When class resumed, the teacher took them outside for shuriken target practice. Unfortunately, this wasn't something his past selves could really help Naruto with, and he ended up missing the target 4 times out of 5. The only shuriken that did hit the target wasn't thrown with enough force to stay on the board, and fell out after only a minute. One boy laughed. "Hey, look at the Dobi, he can't even throw a shuriken properly," he taunted and laughed. Soon everyone was laughing at the blonde, well, everyone except for Sasuke and Hinata. Naruto stared at the ground and flushed with shame. Why could he never do anything right? Sasuke saw Naruto trembling with his fists and teeth clenched and decided he'd had enough. "Hey, cut it out, all of you," he yelled, stepping in front of the blonde as though to shield him from the other kids' judging eyes. Everyone had gone silent after that and no one dared to speak a word, so what if he doesn't have good aim? You'd be bad at stuff too if you were an orphan with no one to teach you. he cried, looking from one side of the crowd to the other. Naruto peeked up through his fringe, shocked that Sasuke was actually standing up for him. Naruto is my friend, and just because he doesn't know much now, that doesn't give you the right to laugh at him. I mean, what kid does know all this stuff if they come from a civilian background, let alone if they have no one to learn from at all? Naruto will be a great shinobi one day, and if any of you want to mock my friend's abilities, then you'll have to go through me first, he cried, glaring at everyone and daring them to even try it. Naruto was shocked beyond belief. Sasuke had stood up for him. He couldn't believe it. He'd known that they were friends now, but he'd thought that the other boy was the type to let people fight their own battles, not stand up for others. Hearing Sasuke say all of that about him and seeing that he really was willing to fight anyone who mocked him made a warm feeling spread through his chest. He was really happy. Sasuke believed in him. He really did. Naruto was so happy right now, he almost wanted to cry out of pure joy, but he held it back as everyone silently went back to their own target practice. Hinata silently padded up to the two boys, as Sasuke turned to look at his friend. You okay? He asked quietly. Naruto nodded and dried his eyes. Did you really mean all that, Sasuke, about me being a strong shinobi one day and everything? He asked. The Uchiha nodded. I do, Naruto. I know you'll be strong one day, maybe not as strong as me, but stronger than everyone else, he teased with a grin. The Uzumaki pouted. Team, I will become stronger than you, and I'll start by beating you at Shuriken target practice, he exclaimed, but with a twinkle of mischief in his eyes. Sasuke caught this and his own eyes gleamed. Oh, will you? Well, you have a long way to go then, Yujiro Tonkachi, he teased. Naruto grinned, and pointed a finger at the other boy. That's it, let's go right now, he cried. Sasuke snorted but tilted his head in acceptance. All right then, you're on, he replied, both getting into position to begin throwing their weapons, when a small noise caught their attention. Both boys turned at once to see Hinata still standing there, poking her fingers together awkwardly and staring at the ground. Do you mind if I join you? She asked timidly, peeking up through her fringe in a similar manner to how Naruto had done earlier. The blonde grinned. Sure, Hinata-chan. Of course you can join us, but you may want to stand a little way away. I've got a feeling that this'll get pretty heated, he replied. Hinata nodded and stood in front of a target that was one away from the two boys. There were plenty of spare ones because after Sasuke's outburst, everyone had moved to the other end of the field from them. The group of now 3 friends laughed as they practiced together all afternoon. It had been 1 week since Naruto and Sasuke had discovered the truth about their pasts and met their former incarnations. Naruto sat in his bedroom in the Uchiha compound, while he listened to Asura tell him stories of his past. It soon became clear that Naruto adored Asura and Indra's father, the sage of the 6 paths, and often asked the other boy what it was like to be the son of such a man, what his father was like and what type of things he'd done in his life. The younger Otsutsuki was all too happy to talk about his father, as he'd loved the man dearly in life and admired him the most out of anyone except for his older brother Indra. Hashirama, too, was interested in the stories, wanting to learn all about the man who'd had his old title, the god of shinobi, originally. Both listened with wonder as Asura told him tales of the adventures his father had had and told him and his brother about when they were children. It seemed that when the topic interested him enough, like the Sage of the 6 Paths, or Hashirama's life, Naruto was very keen to learn about history. The former Shodai had been upset to learn some disheartening things during yesterday's history lesson at the academy. It was about him, but he'd been confused when the sensei had said that he'd only had one younger brother. When Naruto had put his hand up and explained that Hashirama had actually had 3 younger brothers, after he'd heard the Senju mutter it, the teacher had ignored him. Naruto saw that the young-looking Senju was becoming upset, and so he'd spoken up without being called. Excuse me sensei, but the Shodai actually had 3 younger brothers, but 2 of them were unfortunately killed during the Warring States era, he explained again. It was then that the teacher had scolded him right in front of everyone, saying, "Idiot, of course he didn't. The first Hokage had only one younger brother, Tobirama Senju, the one who would take his place as the second Hokage. You obviously don't know anything about history, so keep your mouth shut, Uzumaki, before I throw you out of the room for disrupting my class," he snapped. Naruto looked offended, while Hashirama looked even more depressed at the fact that no one even remembered his precious baby brothers Kawarama and Atama when they were just as important as Tobirama. Even though they had been young when they died and hadn't become S-ranked shinobi like himself, Madara and Tobirama, that was no reason to exclude them from history. They were his brothers, his family. They were the most precious people in the world to him alongside Tobi, and no one even acknowledged their sacrifices. Hell, they didn't even acknowledge their existence. It was painful for the man to hear the sensei outright deny his baby brothers' lives, and while he did feel guilty that Naruto had gotten yelled at for trying to make him feel better, it was slightly comforting to know that the blonde had cared enough to try and get others to acknowledge Atama and Kawarama. He'd made sure to thank Naruto as soon as things had settled. The Uzumaki had smiled and told him that he was happy to do it, and asked him what his brothers had been like, as he'd never had siblings before. That was what had gotten him onto telling stories to the excited blonde boy about both their pasts and the people they'd known. And today, Naruto was being told all the stories he wanted by his two previous transmigrants. Asura was happy someone wanted to learn about his father. He had been sad to find that virtually no one remembered the man, even if he had been the one who had given him all chakra and saved him from destruction. The sage had by now fallen into myth and legend, and it was disheartening for both brothers actually to find out the populace of the world didn't even know the name Hagoromo Otsutsuki. However, Naruto was the exception. He actually cared about history, and while he gravitated more towards the stories told by his own past transmigrants, he was also interested in hearing about Indra's side of things and his past as well as enjoying Madara's tales too. Right now, the blonde was listening to Asura's stories, and then we got in trouble from father for wreaking the garden. However, it was worth it to see the look of horror on Indra's face when he realized he was getting punished too. He said and burst into laughter. Naruto laughed as well. The younger Otsutsuki sure knew how to tell a funny story. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. Naruto stood up and went over to it. Upon opening the door, he saw Sasuke standing there. The blonde grinned. "Hey, what's up?" he asked. "I'm going out to get more food as well as new clothes for you. I was wondering if you wanted to come with me," he asked. Naruto smiled, but it was slightly strained. "No thanks, Sasuke. Just make sure you get the Uzumaki symbol put on my clothes and that they have orange somewhere on them, and maybe get some ramen, please," he begged. Ever since Naruto had moved in, and Sasuke had discovered that the blonde's diet consisted mostly of instant and fresh ramen, the Uchiha had limited his ramen intake to 2 bowls of Ichiraku ramen per day or 1 cup of instant ramen. He let Naruto have more of Ichiraku's ramen, because old man Chuchi made his ramen fresh, and it wasn't filled with all the crap that was in the instant stuff. However, he'd still managed to replace most of his friend's diet with home-cooked meals from the cookbook he'd bought along with more food. However, Sasuke still hadn't had time to go clothes shopping yet. So today he was going to buy more groceries for the two of them and clothes for Naruto. Upon moving the Uzumaki's stuff into his clan compound, Sasuke had gone through the other boys' clothes, and immediately discarded most of them as either too small, too disgusting, i.e. moldy, or just plain disturbing to wear in public, or at all. So now Naruto had a small amount of clothing to wear. A black shirt with a red swirl-like symbol on the front and white shorts, a white shirt with short sleeves and the Uzumaki clan crest on the front with a green long-sleeved undershirt sewn into the inside with grey shorts, a white short-sleeved shirt with the fire symbol on the front as well as on the sides of both sleeves with black 3/4 length pants, that were actually long on him. And the last outfit he had was a short-sleeved dark blue shirt with a sleeveless orange hooded jacket over the top, a pair of dark green pants, and 2 black wristbands. Since he only had 4 outfits to wear, Sasuke had decided he needed a bigger wardrobe, as Naruto often ended up getting his clothing dirty on a daily basis. So now Sasuke was going shopping, since shop owners didn't seem to like the blonde Uzumaki for some reason. The way the villagers treated his friend made Sasuke seethe inside, but he'd promised Naruto that he wouldn't resort to violence against them, as that would only make the civilians want to retaliate against them, and the blonde wouldn't drag his best friend into that mess. After Asura had finished his story, Naruto began to feel bored as he waited for Sasuke to get back. He looked around. The Uchiha compound was huge, and he hadn't truly explored all of it yet. So he stood up and stretched before he took off for some exploring. In the chambers of the Shinobi and Civilian Council, a clamor of voices could be heard within the council room. Hiruzen Sarutobi resisted the urge to massage his temples, even though he could feel a headache brewing there. It had recently come to light that Naruto Uzumaki, Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi and son of both Minato Namikaze, the now deceased Yondaime Hokage, and his also deceased wife, who was quite possibly the last member of the Uzumaki clan, formerly and last known member, Kushina Uzumaki, was currently living with the last Uchiha Sasuke in his clan compound. Now, while Hiruzen, and many members of the Shinobi Council had absolutely no issues with this whatsoever, in fact they believed it was good for both boys to have a friend and some company to live with, the idiotic civilian council did. That demon must be stopped before it corrupts Uchiha-sama anymore, one man yelled. Another woman stood up. Yes, it's obvious that the monster tricked Uchiha-sama into letting it into his home. We must kill it at once, she screamed. The Sandamine had finally had enough. This meeting had been going on for 4 hours now, ever since the civilians had discovered this piece of news. Silence, all of you, he exclaimed, standing up and radiating some ki to shut the stupid people up. Naruto Uzumaki is no demon, and if you all remember, I made a law about mentioning the Kyuubi 7 years ago, so unless you all want to die for breaking it, I suggest that you all shut up, he yelled, truly having enough of his people's close-mindedness. Everyone was silent. Naruto-kun is no demon, and if he has made friends, then that is a good thing, he said slowly, as though talking to children, and really, with how stupid these people were, he basically was. In case you've forgotten, Naruto has always been an orphan, and now Sasuke-kun is as well. If both boys have found a friend in one another and can help each other out of their loneliness, I see no reason to split them up. Besides, with you all so worried about the Kyuubi, this is also a good thing. Having a friend will keep Naruto-kun from spiraling into hatred and destroying the village, though I sometimes wonder why he hasn't already. What with you people messing up his life, and with Naruto-kun around, Sasuke-kun will have more reason to stay in the village, and Naruto can keep him off the path of madness that revenge often brings with it. Therefore, none of you have any right to complain. The old Hokage leaned back in his seat. I don't want to hear any more about this, and I expect you all to leave those 2 boys alone. Dismissed, he ordered. The civilian council all walked out of the room with pissed-off looks on their faces. Some even turned back to shoot a glare at the Sandamine, but left the council chambers without a word. Hiruzen sighed sadly to himself as he stood from his seat. Sometimes being Hokage was more trouble than it was worth, especially with the civilian council breathing down his neck. He also knew that he would have to call both Naruto and Sasuke into his office to have a talk about the fact that they were now living together. When he'd first found out that his surrogate grandson was no longer living in his apartment 1 week ago, he'd initially panicked, and had immediately used his crystal ball to locate the small blonde-haired child. Imagine his surprise when he'd seen Naruto walking together with another boy his age. The identity had other child made him gasp slightly. It was Sasuke Uchiha, another young boy who'd suffered a great loss, when his old rival Danzo had gone behind his back and ordered the heir of the Uchiha clan and one of his best shinobi Itachi Uchiha, who also happened to be young Sasuke's older brother, to massacre his entire clan, bar Sasuke. He had done it and had left the village after begging Sarutobi to protect Sasuke. The old Hokage had agreed, but had been extremely sad to see the broken look in the poor boy's eyes when he woke up in hospital days after. He felt like he'd failed both boys initially, but when he'd found out about the friendship they seemed to have formed right after Sasuke left the hospital, he felt like there might be a possibility for redemption if only he could protect their friendship. When he was a boy and Hashirama sensei had still been alive, the man had told him stories about the friendship he'd once shared with Madara when the two had been children. Now looking at Naruto and Sasuke, he couldn't help but feel that this was what the Shodaimine and Madara would have been like when they were children, if their clans hadn't been enemies, and he was determined that the 2 boys remain together so that they could heal as much as possible. If nothing else, at least he could protect those 2 from suffering the same fate that his sensei and his old friend had. Sarutobi decided to call the 2 boys to his office so that he could ask them about their friendship and also make sure Naruto knew that if he'd wanted to move in with his new friend, the least he could have done was ask him first. He pulsed his chakra slightly. 2 masked Anbu appeared in the corner of the room. Hokage-sama, they coursed. Hiruzen looked at the both of them. Inu, Tora, I want you to find Naruto Uzumaki and Sasuke Uchiha and bring them to my office, he ordered. Both nodded, hi. And then they vanished in a soundless, smokeless shushan. Naruto was wandering Sasuke's house. When he'd rediscovered the other boy's parents' bedroom, he'd closed the door quietly and gone on his way, not wanting to disturb it. As he walked, he hummed to himself. Then he came to another room. Upon opening the door, he found a meticulously clean and neat room, except for the fine layer of dust that had settled over everything. Naruto slowly entered the bedroom and looked around. There were hardly any sentimental or personal items in the bedroom, so that he was unsure whose it was for a few minutes. "Hey! Look!" Hashirama pointed at something behind him. Naruto turned and walked over to the bedside table that the former Hokage had indicated. Sitting on the table was a single picture frame, but the glass was so dusty that he couldn't quite make out who was in the photo. After rubbing some of the dust away with his hand, the blonde's eyes widened at what he saw. It was a photo of a much happier but not much younger Sasuke. The boy was beaming at the camera, eyes sparkling with trust and innocence as he stood next to an older boy. As Naruto's eyes moved over to the other person in the picture, he saw it was a boy around 13 years old, dressed in dark clothes with his long black hair bound in a low ponytail. The teenager had dark gray eyes and was smiling softly as he stood beside Sasuke. Naruto suddenly understood. This must have been Sasuke's older brother, the one who betrayed him and killed his clan. The one person Sasuke had trusted and loved most in the world. It was strange, the boy didn't look like a psychotic killer, but he reminded himself that in the shinobi world, looks could be deceiving. Judging by how happy the Uchiha boy looked in this picture, he must have been extremely close to his brother, and if that was true, then it was no wonder Sasuke had been so adamant about not wanting another brother. His own brother's betrayal must have crushed the poor boy inside, and it made Naruto wonder just how the Uchiha could trust anyone else again. Suddenly, there was a sound behind him and Naruto startled, sure that Sasuke had found him in what was obviously a private place, judging by how long the room had been closed off, and he turned around guiltily, an apology forming in his mind. However, that train of thought died the instant he caught sight of who it was. "Inu ni-san," he beamed at the dog-masked Anbu, walking up to the man. "I haven't seen you for a while," Naruto said. The man bowed his head slightly. "Gomen Naruto-kun, but we don't have time for small talk today, I'm afraid," he replied. Naruto nodded, and gently replaced the photo exactly where he'd found it. Thankfully the silver-haired shinobi didn't ask what he was doing and simply took hold of the boy's shoulder. There was a dizzying flash of movement, and the two were gone. Sasuke had just finished his food shopping and was walking home, when a masked figure suddenly appeared before him. The Uchiha tensed for a moment, before relaxing when he saw it was just one of the Hokage's Anbu. You may wonder how the boy knew about Anbu, when he hadn't had guards 24 hours a day, 7 days a week since he was a baby like Naruto. But don't forget that before he went insane, Itachi had been an Anbu captain. Sasuke tilted his head slightly in greeting. "Is there something wrong?" He paused, not knowing the operative's code name. The man seemed to understand this. "I am Tora, Sasuke-san, and Hokage-sama has requested yours and Naruto-san's presence for a meeting. I was sent to fetch you," he explained quietly. Sasuke nodded, and Tora took hold of his shoulder. They were gone an instant later. Both Anbu appeared in front of the council chamber doors with the two boys in tow. Naruto grinned and waved. "Hey Sasuke, looks like you were summoned too, huh?" he asked the other boy cheerfully. Sasuke nodded, and turned his gaze to the doors before them. Indra, Madara, Asura and Hashirama, who had mostly been quiet this whole time, gazed up at the huge doors in wonder. "Man, my council chambers were never that big," Hashirama half-breathed, half-whined. Madara scoffed. "Oh, stop whining, you big baby, the village was barely built at all back then," he replied, crossing his arms over his chest. Inu then went and knocked on the doors. He must have sent some kind of signal, probably with his chakra, because the Sandamine's voice called out, "Enter." The two Anbu pushed the doors open and gestured for the two boys to walk ahead of them into the room. They did so and were greeted to the sight of many people they didn't know, and one they both did. Naruto grinned and waved. "Hey Hokage Gigi," he said. The old man chuckled, while most of the people in the room glared at the boy, who just ignored him. Unfortunately, the civilian council had somehow found out that Hiruzen had called the boys and had come back and practically demanded another meeting, this time involving the boys. Sasuke, ever the one to take their priorities into concern, looked at the old man as well. "Hokage-sama, why did you need us for this meeting?" he asked in a monotone. Hiruzen placed his fingers together and rested his head on his hands. Yes, well, you see boys, it has come to our attention that the two of you have been living together for some time now, he said lazily. He really wanted this meeting to be over as soon as possible. Naruto nodded. Yeah, that's right, Sasuke invited me to come live with him. Since neither of us like living alone, he explained simply. One civilian council member glared. You sure that's what happened, boy? He sneered. Naruto nodded. That's right, he replied. One woman slammed her hands on the table in protest. Why would Uchiha-sama want someone like you living in his house? You must have tricked him somehow, you worthless brat, she cried. Before anyone had a chance to speak, another woman, the same one from earlier, spoke up. I agree, that demon must be killed now, she screamed. Sasuke instantly became enraged at this, activating his Sharingan and pulling a kunai knife out of the Tora Anbu's holster. In less than a minute, the boy had leapt onto the tabletop and crossed the distance between him and the bitch. No one really caught what happened next, but 1 minute the boy was running towards the woman in a murderous rage, and the next, he stood poised before her on the table, the tip of the kunai a mere inch away from piercing her jugular, furious Sharingan eyes locked onto the terrified counselor's own. If the woman so much as gulped, the kunai knife would pierce her throat and end her life. A drop of sweat trickled down her neck and fell onto the tip. Everyone looked at what, or who had stopped Sasuke's murderous assault. Naruto was standing behind Sasuke, one arm wrapped around the Uchiha's chest, and the other hand clasped firmly in an iron-like grip around the forearm that was holding the kunai, keeping the boy from moving that last inch. Everyone blinked, none of them had even seen the blonde move. Sasuke snarled, glaring at the worthless woman. His weapon was just an inch from ridding the world of Sasuke. Calm down, killing this woman won't do any good, Naruto whispered in his friend's ear. The Uchiha scowled. Why would you bother to save the life of a piece of trash like this? If she could, you know that she would order your execution, he demanded in a whisper, angry that his friend was stopping him from killing one of the people who had made his life hell. Naruto's eyes saddened slightly. Yes, it's true that these people do hate me, but killing them out of revenge isn't going to do any good. Not only would it prove to them that I am the monster they see me as, but that would do nothing but create more hate, and that wouldn't do anything towards our goals. Besides, I want to prove to them that I am me, and that they can trust me to protect them. Please Sasuke, just stop, he pleaded. Sasuke thought Naruto's words through, before he sighed and his Sharingan faded from his eyes. He lowered the kunai he held and looked down. Fine Naruto, have it your way, but if they ever do anything to hurt you or purposely cause you trouble again. The Uchiha glared at all of them, and somehow it was only a little less intimidating than the same look with his Sharingan. Nothing will persuade me from killing him, he stated darkly. The entire room, aside from the shinobi, shivered. Sasuke got off the table, Naruto following a second after, and the two walked back to the other side of the table, where Sasuke handed Tora back his kunai. Naruto turned back to the still speechless civilians and smiled sheepishly, while rubbing the back of his head. Sorry about that everyone, he said. The Sandamine chuckled slightly. Well, councilmen and women, it looks like Naruto really can keep Sasuke from the wrong path, therefore I have decided that they shall be able to live in the Uchiha compound together. Dismissed, he ordered. Naruto and Sasuke walked out of the room after the old Hokage, ignoring the glares that were sent Naruto's way. After the Uzumaki had said goodbye to the third, the two boys began to walk home. Hiruzen smiled. Yes, I believe the two of you will do great things in this world, Naruto-kun, Sasuke-kun, and I hope you both end up happy, he thought, before turning and beginning to walk back to his office. Naruto and Sasuke walked through the village together, both returning to the Uchiha compound. Man, that council meeting had just been one big energy drainer. Right now they just wanted to rest and maybe do some light training later on. Sasuke didn't miss the glares the majority of the villagers were sending Naruto's way, and proceeded to glare right back, daring anyone to come close. They soon arrived back at the Uchiha compound. Naruto kicked off his shoes without bothering to straighten him and just about stumbled towards the bedroom he shared with Sasuke. In fact, he did stumble and almost fell, however Sasuke managed to catch him just before he hit the ground. The last Uchiha picked up his friend and sighed. Looks like everything that happened today exhausted you more than we thought, huh Naruto? He thought, carrying the blonde into the room they shared. He wondered if Naruto would like his own bedroom soon, and decided to help him choose one after he woke up. As he lay the other boy down in the bed and covered him with the blankets, a thought suddenly came to him. Would his parents have let the two of them be friends? Would they even have become friends if the massacre had never happened and the two never found out about their previous lives? Sasuke didn't know. But, despite how painful losing his parents had been and how even more painful Itachi's betrayal had been, he knew that he wouldn't give his best friend up for anything. Thinking about best friends and Itachi made the young Uchiha remember his brother's words from before he'd left him that night. Flashback *. Sasuke stood before Itachi in the silent Uchiha district. Dead bodies of his clansmen littered the streets all around them. His brother's cold eyes bored into Sasuke's mind, as he stood and trembled in terror. This wasn't his big brother. This was a monster. Sasuke breathed harder. As tears poured from his eyes, he was so scared. Please. Don't kill me," the boy begged. Itachi stared impassively at his little brother. "You're not even worth killing, foolish little brother." Sasuke choked on a sob slightly, breathing heavily from fear. "If you wish to kill me one day, foster your hatred and despise me surviving in an unsightly manner such as this, by all means flee, cling to your wretched life, and when you possess the same eyes that I do, come back and kill me. However, there is a catch." Itachi closed his eyes for a moment before he opened them again, his grayish eyes bleeding into blood red while his pupils morphed into a shuriken-like pinwheel shape. "Take the life of your best friend, you must kill him," he said, while the wind blew around harshly, whipping their hair into a frenzy and blowing leaves through the air. Sasuke choked with horror, eyes wide. What? That was what his father had meant by special circumstances. That was monstrous, despicable. He would never kill Naruto. Wait, Naruto? Since when was that boy his best friend? No, that didn't matter. All that did matter was that he would kill himself before harming the blonde to gain power like some kind of insane madman. Like Itachi. Wait, that meant you killed Shisui, he gasped, the truth smacking him in the face. His entire body began shaking again. Everything that had happened began swirling inside his head. He felt sick, like he was going to keel over at any minute. All it took was one look into Itachi's Sharingan, and the boy fell to the ground in a dead faint. End flashback *. Sasuke slumped forwards, panting and gasping for air, his entire body trembling harshly, and sweat dripping down his face. The boy's vision began swimming and fading in and out again. The arm that he was using to hold himself up was trembling as well, the feeling slowly seeping out of it. His eyes, which had changed to the Sharingan sometime during his reminiscing, began to burn. He looked up at Naruto's face, peaceful as he slept. Itachi's voice rang in his head again, echoing around in his mind, "When you possess the same eyes that I do, come back and kill me. However, there is a catch. Take the life of your best friend, you must kill him." Without even being aware of what he was doing, the Uchiha's hand had begun creeping towards Naruto's throat. Some part of his mind was screaming, "Stop! Stop! I won't do it! I won't!" But that part was drowned out by the voice of his older brother, commanding, so strong that his own will was being overridden. "No. No. I won't. I refuse." He couldn't stop. He wasn't strong enough to do it. He only had one choice now: help. He screamed out in his mind, hoping, praying to be heard, "I don't want to, I won't do it." The child's hand was now resting on the Uzumaki's throat, pale fingers tightening. "Please, I beg you, make me stop." Suddenly Indra was before the boy, and his own Sharingan eyes were boring into his current transmigrants. "Release," he ordered, and the black-haired boy felt something shatter in his mind. Sasuke collapsed to the floor, quivering. Soon he began sobbing, then screaming and beating the ground with his fists. The racket woke Naruto, who looked around confusedly, before his eyes rested on the broken form of Sasuke, lying on the ground before him. The blonde shot up and over to the Uchiha, wrapping his arms around the boy, and keeping him from collapsing again. Sasuke continued to scream for a few minutes, while Naruto just held him gently. Soon the screams turned into shattered sobs once more, before finally fading into quiet sniffles again. Once the other boy was stable enough to talk, the Uzumaki leaned back, but Sasuke held tight to his hand, indicating that he needed the physical contact right now. Naruto looked worriedly at the boy he had come to call his best friend. "Are you feeling better?" he whispered, because it was obvious Sasuke wasn't all right. The black-haired boy shivered, then nodded. Naruto frowned deeply. "What happened?" he asked, still with a soft voice. However, Sasuke shook his head and tried to speak, but no sound would come out. He swallowed and tried again. I don't know what happened. 1 minute I'm sitting next to you, watching you rest, the next, my mind goes back to the massacre and I can hear Itachi's voice in my head, telling me to kill you. Sob. I tried to fight it, but it was so strong I don't even know what that was. Sasuke sobbed, clutching onto Naruto with all his strength. I think we may know what happened. Both boys turned around, to see Indra and Madara floating next to Sasuke. Madara looked down slightly. I knew it was possible, but I had never seen it done or done it myself before, he started, face twisting with shame. Naruto, Sasuke, Asura and Hashirama all stared at the two with slightly horrified curiosity. Indra then took over. We believe that when Itachi placed you under Tsukuyomi, he also placed a hypnosis genjutsu in your mind, so that if the time ever came that you actually did make a best friend, the genjutsu would take effect, and make you kill that person, thus forcing you to awaken. He explained, but was cut off by the trembling voice of Sasuke, the Mangekyo Sharingan, he whispered. Madara nodded. That's basically it, Sasuke, he replied. Sasuke looked down at his hands, the hands that had almost murdered Naruto. He began shaking again, and tears streamed down from his face. Why? He asked. Naruto frowned. He told me he hated me, but did he really hate me that much that he would actually make me kill my best friend if I ever made one? Did he really want me to suffer so much that he would place a genjutsu in my mind that would literally force me to kill the only person I had left, even if I didn't want to? The boy sobbed uncontrollably. Why, damn it? Why me? Why the hell did he have to do this? What the hell happened to my big brother to change him into a monster like that? Sasuke began screaming again, trying to release all the anger, betrayal, pain and guilt as well as a bunch of other emotions that he couldn't name that were tormenting and twisting him up inside. Naruto only watched silently as the other boy cried and screamed. It wasn't right for Sasuke to have to suffer like this, it really wasn't. Despite his near death by his best friend's hands, he couldn't help but feel glad that they found each other when they did. Naruto could imagine the alternate scenario, and he didn't like it one bit. Slowly, Sasuke calmed down, falling onto the bed, his light breathing indicating that he had fallen asleep. Poor boy, he wore himself out, Hashirama said. Naruto nodded, then lay down next to the other boy and pulled the blanket up over them. Don't worry, Sasuke, he thought, watching the black-haired boy's exhausted face. I promise I'll help you. Slowly, Naruto closed his eyes and fell into a deep dreamless sleep alongside his friend. The next day the two boys woke up around the same time, surprisingly. It was a day off from the academy, and they'd woken up rather late in the day actually, but that was to be expected, what with the exhausting day they'd had yesterday. Sasuke sat up and yawned, while Naruto stretched like a cat. The blonde then yawned and rubbed his eyes, being the more tired of the two. Sasuke looked at the boy, then stood up. You can have a bath first to wake up Naruto. I'll start making breakfast, okay? He asked. Naruto nodded and crawled out of bed, searching around for a clean set of clothing. Today he decided to wear his white short-sleeved shirt with the fire symbol on the front as well as on the sides of both sleeves with black 3/4 length pants. As he took the clothes to the bathroom, Naruto hummed to himself. It was a song he had made up. He called it Shooting Star. Once he got to the bathroom, the blonde made quick work of washing himself and his hair before relaxing for a couple of minutes in the hot water. Once he stepped out of the bathtub again, Naruto felt much more refreshed and awake. After drying himself and getting dressed, the boy happily walked out of the room and into the kitchen, where Sasuke was making breakfast. I'm done, Sasuke, you can go have a bath now, he said. Sasuke nodded and left the kitchen after letting Naruto know that his breakfast was on the table. Once the two boys had done their morning routine, they decided to go to the park to relax. After all, they could train later. So the Uzumaki and Uchiha walked quietly to the park. Upon noticing his friend's subdued attitude, Sasuke asked the blonde what was wrong. Oh, it's nothing really except, well, Naruto looked down and blushed, twisting the hem of his shirt with his hands, obviously uneasy about something. Sasuke raised an eyebrow at the other boy's behavior. Naruto was never this reluctant to talk about things, especially with him, so there was defiantly something wrong. What is it? He asked curiously, wanting to know what would make the Uzumaki so withdrawn. Naruto sighed. It's just that, tomorrow is my 7th birthday, and the villagers tend to get a bit more outgoing with their hatred of me on that day, he explained nervously, rubbing his left arm with his hand, so it might be better if you stayed away from me all day. In fact, I should probably go back to my old apartment, so that they don't wreck your house by accident or something, he finished, looking down at the ground. Everyone was silent and staring at the blonde with wide eyes. Sasuke had stopped and was standing a few steps ahead of the boy, looking back at him with shock written all over his face. He quickly walked back over to Naruto and took him gently by the shoulders. Naruto flinched slightly at the contact but kept his gaze on the ground. They do what? He asked slowly, while the blonde bit his lip. Just what do those people do to you on your birthday, Naruto? Sasuke asked, trying to keep his temper in check as his imagination went through all the things that the people of the village could have done and would do to his best friend. They do different things, it all depends on their moods at the time, I guess. Sometimes they chase me, other times they ransack my apartment, and last year Naruto paused, trembling slightly, his breathing getting slightly harder as the blonde clenched his fists. The boy gulped before continuing, last year a group of them dragged me out of my apartment at night and chased me, trying to beat me, he finally choked out. Sneaking a peek up at the Uchiha, Naruto could see that Sasuke was livid with pure rage. His pale face had gone even whiter, he clenched his fists so hard that his palms began to bleed and his eyes burst into the Sharingan, the red eyes glowing crimson, the tomo spinning furiously, moving around his pupils so fast that it looked like the small dot in the center was surrounded by a solid ring of black, before they slowed to a stop, revealing 2 tomoe in each eye instead of the one in each he previously had. Naruto, eyes wide, could only point and gape at the other boy. Indra filled Sasuke in when he seemed confused. Your Sharingan just matured, you gained another tomoe in each of your eyes, so now you have 2 in each, he explained. Sasuke seemed shocked, then smiled. I guess this means extra training then, he replied softly, almost to himself. The two continued walking after a while, before Naruto grew bored. They had come to an empty training ground by then, bypassing the park as both were no longer in the mood for playing and the blonde was itching for some action. They wouldn't be doing any more taijutsu training in the academy for a while, and Naruto was just about to suggest they spar, before Sasuke beat him to it. Hey, Naruto, since we probably won't do any taijutsu training for a while, do you want to spar with me? The Uchiha asked, looking for all the world like he couldn't care less. However, Naruto caught the glint in the other boy's eyes that said he really wanted to do this, and since the blonde wanted the same thing, he figured, why not? The Uzumaki grinned, sure. Do you want to do it like academy sparring, with a ring and stuff? He asked curiously. At Sasuke's nod, Naruto went about drawing a circle in the dirt, that was wide enough to give the two some decent sparring room. As they stood preparing, Hashirama turned to the Uzumaki, now Naruto-kun, I think it would be best if you let us help you with this, no doubt. Indra and Madara will be helping Sasuke-kun with this battle, so it would only be fair if you let us help you as well. After all, a shinobi is supposed to use all of the advantages at his disposal, he explained. The blonde nodded and Hashirama instructed him on which stances to use. Meanwhile, Sasuke was also receiving advice from his previous transmigrants. Alright Sasuke, I assume you've been taught the Uchiha-style interceptor fist, correct? Madara asked as the boy nodded. Indra looked at the raven. I created that style specifically to work most efficiently with my dojutsu, so now that you've awakened your Sharingan, you'll be much more effective with it, the Otsutsuki explained. Sasuke replied simply, hi, and activated his Sharingan. As both boys were ready, the two walked up to each other, Indra and Madara hanging back slightly, while Asura and Hashirama floated beside Naruto. The two boys held up their hands in the combat seal. The former Shodai looked between them. Are you both ready? He asked. Sasuke and Naruto simply nodded. Hashirama nodded back and the two shinobi in training got into position, Sasuke in his clan's taijutsu stance, and Naruto in the stance that his previous lives had instructed him to use. It was a sort of animalistic stance, with the way he crouched and his arms out in front of his chest, the fingers of his hands curled into half fists, resembling claws. They waited half a second, before both rushed at each other. Naruto struck first, sending a strong punch to his friend's head. Sasuke saw the blow coming with his Sharingan and managed to dodge by moving his head to the side. The young Uchiha then brought his leg up in an attempt to kick the blonde in the head. However, the Uzumaki's fast reflexes due to his younger years allowed him to dodge, but just barely. Instead, Naruto grabbed the leg and threw the other boy over his shoulder, but Sasuke landed on his hands and sprung upright again. This time it was Sasuke who went in for a blow, ducking to the ground and delivering a sweeping kick, knocking his friend's feet out from under him. When he landed, the Uchiha tried to capitalize and land a hit with his elbow into Naruto's stomach, though the Uzumaki rolled away just in time and sprung up, blocking a punch aimed at his chest with his forearm. Although he wasn't fast enough to block the kick his sparring partner aimed at his stomach. It was a strong kick and enough to blow the blonde back towards the edge of the ring. Naruto, though, decided he wasn't going to go down so easily, and used both of his hands and legs to slow his movement, so that he stopped just before he went outside the ring. Using both his legs and arms to give himself more momentum, Naruto then shot towards his friend, rearing his right hand back for a low punch. Sasuke also ran forwards, bringing his left fist back. Both hits connected at the exact same time. Naruto's fist buried itself into Sasuke's stomach, while Sasuke's fist connected hard with Naruto's cheek. Both ninja in training were completely still for a full 20 seconds, before both got blown back at the same time by each other's attacks. Naruto managed to stay upright, however Sasuke got knocked onto the ground and went skidding through the dirt for a few meters before he finally stopped. The blonde stood up. "I win, Sasuke," he said with a grin. Sasuke sighed, before smiling. "Yeah, I guess you do this time," he replied, putting emphasis on the last two words. Naruto pouted. "And what is that supposed to mean?" he asked, crossing his arms. "It means that the next time we spar, I am going to win," Sasuke replied nonchalantly, but with a smirk at the end. Naruto scoffed. "Ha. In your dreams, Sasuke, now that I'm on top, there's no way I'm going to lose to you again," he replied haughtily. The two glared at one another, before both began laughing. That is until Sasuke cringed in on himself, holding his stomach in pain. Naruto ran over to his friend when he saw this. "Sasuke, are you okay?" he asked, kneeling down next to the boy and looking him over in worry. The Uchiha grinned slightly. "Yeah, I'm fine," he replied with bravado, before wincing again. Naruto's eyes widened, before his entire demeanor turned serious. "Let me see," he said, a no-nonsense tone in his voice. The Uchiha grinned half-heartedly. "Hey, come on. I'm fine," he said again, gripping his stomach the next second. The Uzumaki rolled his eyes. "Yes, I can tell, and I'm a Hyuga let me see team," he replied sarcastically, a more serious expression on his face than Sasuke had ever seen. Sasuke sighed, but relented, letting the blonde raise his shirt, wincing a little again. Naruto frowned, gently moving the cloth out of the way to see a nasty bruise forming on the pale flesh of his best friend's stomach. The blonde cringed, now feeling extremely guilty he hadn't meant to hit the boy that hard. "Sasuke, I'm sorry," he replied softly, looking down. Sasuke sighed. "It's okay, both of us kind of went too far in that spar. Speaking of which, how's your cheek?" the boy asked. Naruto touched his cheek where he'd been punched, only to feel it all healed. "Fine," he replied, still looking on in worry, gently running his hand over the bruise. "Sasuke, are you?" He was cut off, however, when the other boy choked and pushed his hand away. "Don't," he ordered. A cheeky grin formed on Naruto's face, and he immediately changed his question. "Sasuke, are you ticklish?" he asked instead. Sasuke blushed and looked away indignantly. Naruto tilted his head, squinting his eyes in a way that Indra remembered from Asura, the look saying, "Yeah, you are." Naruto's grin soon faded. "However, while I would like to take advantage of this discovery, I don't want to hurt you by making you strain muscles that are already bruised," he said, standing up and helping the other boy up as well. "I'm not sure what we should do. I don't think that's bad enough to go to the hospital, but I also think it's a bit too serious to just treat with an ice pack," he said, cupping his chin as he thought about what was the more appropriate action. Sasuke huffed. "Why don't we try the ice pack first, and then if it's still hurt, we can check it out at the hospital later," he suggested. Naruto smiled. "That sounds good," he acquiesced with a nod. The two walked back to the Uchiha compound, Sasuke trying to act strong, but still flinching or gasping occasionally at the pain that resonated from his stomach. The blonde was so worried about his friend, that he didn't even notice the hateful glares of the civilians around him as they walked home. When the two reached the Uchiha compound, Naruto left Sasuke on the step before the Genkan, while the other boy quickly went to the kitchen and got an ice pack out of the freezer. Wrapping it in a towel as he returned to the door, the Uzumaki leaned down and handed his friend the pack. Sasuke took the ice pack gratefully. In truth, he had been hiding just how painful the bruise was. As he placed the wrapped frozen block against his stomach, wincing again as the cold object touched his tender skin, Naruto was in a discussion with his two past lives. "You're getting good at my taijutsu style. But remember to take it slow, Naruto-kun," Hashirama advised as he looked at the blonde boy. Asura nodded. "Just in case, I think it would be better if you learned some of my taijutsu as well. I pray that Sasuke never turns on us, but I just want to be sure you can defend yourself without either my brother or Madara being able to counter and kill you. I don't want to take the chance," he added worriedly. Naruto agreed that it would be best if he had some diversity in his fighting style. "And speaking of diversity, hey, do you guys think that Madara would be willing to teach me to use a gunbai? I was thinking of using one as my primary weapon since it's one of the most versatile weapons there is," he asked. Hashirama tilted his head to the side in thought, his eyes closed as he did so. Possibly. I'm sure he would be glad to have someone to pass his techniques onto and who would be willing to learn from him." The Senju turned to his current transmigrant with a smile on his face. "Tell you what, I'll ask him for you, Naruto-kun. How does that sound?" "The former Shodai?" asked the Uzumaki. Naruto grinned. "Thanks, Hashirama," he replied cheerfully. It was time to start training seriously. It was a day later, October 10th, and Naruto's 7th birthday. As the two boys walked back from the academy, Naruto tried his best to ignore the glares sent his way. There were only very few people glaring at him, however, thanks to the boy he could now call his best friend, Sasuke Uchiha. The other boy was sending his own heated glare at anyone and everyone who stared at them. Sasuke, upon finding out what usually happened on the blonde's birthday and that today was his birthday, had decided to organize his own day for his friend. He'd kept it a secret, so Naruto had no idea what was happening today. "Okay, we're here," the Uchiha said. Naruto looked up, and his eyes widened. They were at Ichiraku Ramen. The entire stand was decorated with orange streamers, and balloons adorned with the Uzumaki swirl were tied to the roof, floating in the air above the stand. Naruto was pulled out of his shock when Chuchi and Ayami walked out onto the street, the old man holding a covered pot filled with something that smelled deliciously like miso pork ramen, his favorite. "Happy birthday, Naruto-kun." The two ramen chefs and Sasuke, along with Asura, Hashirama, and surprisingly, even Madara and Indra cried at once. The blonde turned wide blue eyes to Sasuke. "You set all this up for me?" he asked in awe. The Uchiha nodded. "Of course. Did you really think I wouldn't do anything? Or I would just leave you alone today? You're my best friend, Naruto. I was happy to do this. Besides, you deserve it," he smiled slightly. Ayami and Chuchi nodded. "That's right, Naruto-kun. Now, let's sit down and eat before the ramen gets cold." Naruto grinned hugely and nodded. After the special birthday ramen was finished, most of which was eaten by Naruto, though no one really minded, it was time for presents. Chuchi went first, giving the blonde a year's supply of free ramen coupons. Next was Ayami. She had gotten Naruto a book titled, A History of the Most Powerful Shinobi of Konoha, knowing that he loved to learn about the previous Hokage, among other famous ninja. Naruto beamed at her, holding the book close. Sasuke went next. "Here," he said, handing the Uzumaki a large wrapped package. After he opened it, Naruto fist-pumped in enthusiasm. It was a large, but not too big, dark blue gunbai with red around the edges and the Uzumaki spiral on the front. Picking it up and giving it a practice swing, he found it to be slightly heavy, but perfect for when he would graduate. Turning to his best friend, he grinned so large that his eyes were closed. "Thanks, Sasuke," he exclaimed. Suddenly Hinata Hyuga appeared in the entrance. Am I late?" she asked shyly. After spending so much time with the blonde and Sasuke, Hinata had lost her stutter, but was still shy, quiet and gentle. Chuchi smiled. "Not at all, come in little one," he replied. The young blue-haired girl walked into the shop, where the old ramen chef placed a bowl of ramen on the bench in front of her. Hinata smiled shyly in gratitude, before placing down the package in her arms and turning to the blonde boy she'd accidentally sat next to without even knowing it. Seeing the boy so close, the girl blushed and turned away quickly. Naruto quirked an eyebrow. "Hey, you're all red, Hinata. Are you all right?" he asked, leaning in even closer. Everyone there had to hold back their laughter at the scene in front of them. Hashirama sighed and shook his head, while Asura face-palmed himself. "I'm going to have to teach him about girls," the former Shodai said to himself, while the Otsutsuki nodded in agreement. "Naruto-kun," Hashirama said, "I don't think you getting so close to her is going to help her feel better. Remember what I told you about personal space?" he asked. Naruto mentally nodded his head, and turned away from the heiress, giving the girl enough time to calm herself down. A few minutes later, Hinata had calmed down enough to present the blonde with his gift. It was a square package wrapped in orange wrapping paper. Naruto took it carefully, surprising the Hyuga. He unwrapped it just as gently, and was surprised with what the blue-haired girl had gotten him. It was a specific set of clothes. They resembled a sage's attire, with long sleeves that widened at the ends. They were mostly yellow with orange in specific places. Turning it over, he was even more surprised when he was met with the same pattern that decorated the back of the Sage of the Six Paths outfit, that is the red Rinnegan symbol with 3 rows of 3 red Magatama under that. Naruto looked to Hinata with wide eyes, as did Asura and Indra. "Where did you get this pattern from, Hinata-chan?" he asked. "Well, I had a dream about it before I started making the robes, and I felt like it just fit you, Naruto-kun," she explained. Looking down, "I'm sorry if you don't like it," she started, but was cut off by the voice of the boy she was talking to. No, I like it, really I do." He paused, and the girl looked up at his face. "Thank you, Hinata-chan," he said with a soft, grateful smile on his face. Hinata's eyes widened and her face lit up like a bonfire. She had to try very hard not to collapse. Afterwards, everyone finished the ramen and Ayami brought out the cake. Since they had to get to the academy, Naruto blew the candles out and made his wish, and then Chuchi cut the cake into 6 pieces, 1 for himself, 1 for Ayami, 1 for Sasuke, who, despite not liking sweets that much, took the piece of cake anyway, 1 for Hinata, 1 for Naruto and, on the blonde's insistence, 1 for the Sandaime, Hiruzen Sarutobi. Naruto had intended to keep the cake in the fried at home, then give it to the old man tomorrow, but just as he took the ramen takeaway container with the cake in it, a familiar voice called from the doorway. "Sorry I'm late everyone, but I had some things I had to deal with this morning." Naruto lit up at the voice, spinning around to see the old Hokage standing in the doorway with a gentle smile on his face. "Gigi," he exclaimed happily, running up to Hiruzen. The Sandaime caught his surrogate grandson in his arms, chuckling at the boy's youthful energy as he did so. Then he stopped with a look of horror on his face as the image of a man in tight green spandex with a black bowl-cut head of hair and huge eyebrows came to mind, the man performing a thumbs-up with a grin while his teeth sparkled. The Hokage shuddered as the image faded, before being brought back to reality when a clear plastic container with a piece of cake in it was held up to him. "Here Gigi, this is for you. I was going to give it to you after the academy today, but since you're here I can give it to you now," Naruto explained with a smile. Hiruzen smiled back. "That's very kind of you, Naruto-kun, but are you sure you want to give me your cake?" he asked. The Uzumaki nodded. "Hi, Chuchi-ji-san, Ayami-ne-chan, Sasuke, Hinata-chan and I already had ours, so here you go," he said cheerfully. The Sandaime took the container. "Thank you very much for the cake, Naruto-kun. I'll have it for morning tea." The old man took a small wrapped package out of a pocket of his robes. "Here, this is for you. Happy birthday, Naruto-kun," he said cheerfully, handing the package to the boy. "Thank you, Hokage Gigi." Naruto beamed, and began unwrapping the paper. After it was fully unwrapped, the boy looked at what he held. It was a small book, with 2 different shades of gray on the front, 1 around the border, and 1 in the middle of the front cover. Written in black kanji on the front of the book was the title. "Tales of a Gutsy Ninja," he read out loud. The Hokage, sensing the question that the boy wanted to ask, began to speak. "The main character of that book has the same name as you, Naruto-kun." He paused as the blonde looked up at him with wide eyes. "Your father loved that book and admired the main character so much, that he and your mother named you after him, in the hopes that you'd become a great shinobi, just like the hero of that book," he explained softly. Naruto looked down to the book he held again, and gently stroked the front cover. Even if he didn't know much about his parents, he now knew that the book he held had been his two sons' favorite, and that both he and his mother had wanted him to be a hero, just like the one from the book. It wasn't a lot, but it showed that his parents had loved and believed in him, and for now, that was enough. The blonde held the book to his chest and crossed his arms over it, smiling down at his lap. I promise, I will be a hero, and I will save this world, Ji-chan, Tu-san, Ka-chan, he promised, looking up at the old man with a fire burning in his eyes, determination lighting them. The Sandamine smiled and nodded. I know you will, Naruto-kun. I know you will, he replied softly. After that, the third had to return to work, and the 3 academy students left the ramen stand, waving goodbye to the owners, and going on their way to the academy. They would save this world and bring peace to it, no matter what. It had been a few days since Naruto turned 7 years old. The boy was currently engrossed in reading The Tales of a Gutsy Ninja. Ever since the third had given it to him, he had read it at least 6 times. In that time it had become his favorite book, not only because the main character shared his name, or because their personalities were similar, though those things added to his love of the story. No, it was because of the storyline itself. It was about the main character, Naruto Musabi's goal of bringing peace to the world and ending the curse that Naruto connected to the hatred of the world that was present now. To the boy, it was almost like the book was written specifically for him. As he let himself fall into the story, he pictured himself in the same situation as Naruto. Naruto's imagination. Kunai clashed and sparks and clangs echoed through the forest. A blonde and green blur leapt to hide behind a tree. The figure stood there panting and trying to catch his breath. He was dressed in a green flak jacket and black pants. The person was fairly tall. He had blonde spiky hair, azure blue eyes and 3 whisker-like birthmarks on each cheek. The evil ninja that he was fighting laughed. Just give up, you'll never be able to beat me, he exclaimed, clenching the sharp-pointed black rod he held in his hand. The man put his hand into the weapon pouch at his hip and brought out 2 papier-mâché smoke bombs. Give up, on me giving up, he called. The man threw the smoke bombs out into the open. As soon as they impacted with the ground, the balls exploded into white smoke that clouded the evil ninja's vision. The sound of clashing metal was heard, and sparks could be seen, before there was a loud thump that sounded much like a body hitting the ground. When the smoke cleared, the blonde man was seen standing and panting over his defeated opponent. The unknown shinobi slowly lifted his head from the dirt. Even if you kill me, others will attack the village. There will never be true peace in this cursed shinobi world. He managed to get out. The man stood there looking down at his opponent. Maybe not now, but I will end that curse. If there's such a thing as peace, I'll find it. I'll never give up, he exclaimed with conviction. The defeated man lifted his head a little more. Who are you? He asked. The other man lifted his hand. My name is Naruto. The blonde boy was snapped out of his reading by his friend's voice. He looked up. Yeah? He called back. Sasuke opened the door and poked his head into the room. Breakfast is ready. Luckily we don't have the academy today, he replied. Naruto nodded, placing his bookmark in the book to save the page. The Uchiha raised an eyebrow. Reading that book again? That's what? The 20th time you've read it already? He joked with a smirk on his face. Naruto stuck his tongue out at his best friend. Ha, 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 funny Sasuke, he deadpanned, putting the book down on his bed. I've read it so many times because it's awesome. It's about a guy who wants to end the curse that plagues the shinobi world, that curse being the cycle of hatred, and his journey to bring true peace to the world while he never gives up. It's a good book, Sasuke. You should read it too, he explained, getting up and walking out of the bedroom. Sasuke glanced down at the little book on the blonde's bed. The story that his friend had described wasn't really his thing, but he had to admit that the parallels between the story and their mission were defiantly there. He shrugged. What the hell? Sitting down, the Uchiha picked up the book and opened it to the first page. After breakfast, Naruto left the Uchiha compound. He walked around the village, watching the people around him. Despite the glares, the blonde did his best to ignore the villagers that hated him. As he walked, he thought about the book he'd been reading. The story was all too similar to their current mission. He really wanted to be like the Naruto in the book and end the hatred that plagued the world. He wanted to fulfill Sen and Sama's wish and, along with his friends, bring peace to the world, but he had absolutely no idea how to go about doing it. Naruto sighed to himself. Their mission really was a hard one, wasn't it? Naruto was snapped out of his thoughts when he looked around and saw he'd arrived at an abandoned training ground without even realizing it. As he thought about whether or not to do some training, he sensed a new presence enter the field. "Hey!" a male voice called. Turning around, the blonde was met with the sight of an older academy student, about the same age as those bullies who had tried to pick on Hinata before. He had long brown hair, pale skin and white eyes, so he was either a Hyuga or blind. The boy also had bandages wrapped around his forehead. Naruto tilted his head to the side in acknowledgement. "Can I help you?" he asked, deciding to be polite, despite the haughty air the boy seemed to exude. "You are Naruto Uzumaki, correct?" he asked. When the blonde nodded, the boy gave him a once-over, HMPH, "So you are the one who has been spending time with Hinata-sama." The Hyuga practically spat the name as though it were poison. Naruto's eyes narrowed. "Is there something wrong with that?" he asked. The Hyuga crossed his arms over his chest. "Ever since she has met you, Hinata has been trying harder in our spars, despite the fact that it's impossible for her to win," the boy started, and the blonde raised an eyebrow. "If you are the one who has been filling her head with nonsense about being able to become strong, I demand you stop immediately. All you are doing is pushing her on a useless errand. A failure will always be a failure no matter how hard one tries. You can never escape your destiny, your fate. Only those born with strength will ever be truly powerful in this world, unlike you, a person who continues to defy his fate." He spoke with haughtiness. Naruto's eyes widened, then narrowed. With each word spoken by the Hyuga boy, the blonde became more and more angry. Who did this bastard think he was, deciding who someone could and couldn't be? The rage he felt was not only for himself, but for his own past lives and Hinata. Both Hashirama and Asura had been failures at the beginning and had become powerful through hard work, so this bastard was insulting all four of them at once. The blonde growled, "Oh yeah. What gives you the right to decide what someone can and can't be?" he demanded. "There are loads of people all over the world who started out as weaklings and still became strong. Hell, no one is strong at birth. So what you're saying makes even less sense." He yelled at the boy. "Who the hell are you anyway?" he asked, while Asura began gently calming the blonde's anger. Getting too angry before and during a battle can be both beneficial and detrimental. It can physic you up and give you more energy and determination, or it could lead to you making a mistake and cost you the battle. Asura preferred being calm in battle, because at least then you will be less likely to make a mistake on your own. The Hyuga smirked. "I am Neji Hyuga, branch member, and the prodigy of the Hyuga clan. Hinata-sama may be the clan heir, but she is too weak to ever amount to anything," he replied. Naruto growled. "Okay." He didn't care what Asura said about not fighting. This asshole needed a beating. "Well, I was born without any talent, and I will beat you down and prove to you right now just how wrong you are." The blonde got into his battle stance. This was about more than just Hinata-chan now, though he would fight for her any day of the week. This was about finally gaining some respect, for himself and all those hard workers who had no talent but who still worked hard to change themselves and become strong. Neji sneered. This talentless loser beat him. A prodigy of the Hyuga? Impossible. Still, the other boy got into his gentle fist stance. If the boy was so eager to be knocked down, then who was he to complain? Asura and Hashirama floated worriedly nearby. "Are you sure about this, Naruto-kun?" Hashirama asked. "We've barely started your training," he pointed out. Naruto nodded mentally. "I know that. But you heard what he said. This is about our honor as hard workers. I will prove to him that you can become strong even without being born with talent or power for all of us." He thought back. Asura looked touched. "Naruto," he said softly. The two living boys glared at each other for another moment before running forwards and going to attack. Kunai clashed and sparks and clangs echoed through the air. Naruto leapt back, away from Neji. The blonde stood there panting and trying to catch his breath. Neji scoffed. "Just give up, you'll never be able to beat me," he exclaimed, adjusting his gentle fist stance slightly. Naruto reached into his hip pouch and pulled out a smoke bomb that he'd gotten from Sasuke, when he'd bought him new ninja tools. "Give up, on me giving up," he called. The blonde Uzumaki threw the smoke bomb. As soon as it impacted with the ground, the purple ball exploded into white smoke that clouded the Hyuga's vision. Neji scoffed. He was trying to blind a Hyuga. Had Hinata not even explained to the boy about their clan's Byakugan? Well, she shouldn't have anyway, it was their bloodline after all. Neji, who had just been using his regular eyes, having not deemed the Uzumaki a great enough threat to use his Byakugan on, activated his dojutsu and searched around. But the blonde was nowhere to be seen. What? He thought as his eyes widened, but that's impossible, no one can hide from our eyes. Just then a sharp feeling in his eyes caused him to close them for a moment and lift his hands to rub at them. Suddenly a cracking sound caught his attention and he opened his blurry eyes and looked down, right as the ground directly in front of him shattered and a blonde figure shot out of the earth and nailed him under the chin with a strong uppercut. Neji was knocked off his feet by the blow and hit the ground hard. Naruto stood there panting, looking down at the other boy with a glare in his eyes. I don't know what you have against people who work hard, but I don't care. I have become this strong through hard work and effort even though everyone constantly tells me I'm nothing and will never become strong. I didn't give up and kept trying until I became as strong as I am now, and I'm going to keep getting stronger. I decided my own path in life. And I don't give a damn about fate or any crap like that. You can do it too. After all, unlike me, you're not a failure, he said with eyes of fire, making Neji's eyes widen. He really believed that. Naruto wobbled slightly, before finally falling to the ground in exhaustion. Asura and Hashirama looked down at the boy. He really did it. The former Shodai exclaimed happily. Asura was just as proud of the boy as his other transmigrant. In fact, he was even prouder. You did it, Naruto. You proved to everyone that hard work and effort can make you just as strong as any natural-born genius. Thank you for standing up for our honor, he thought gratefully. Neji managed to push himself to his feet, and wobbled over to Naruto. He stood over the boy, staring down at him with an unreadable expression. Asura and Hashirama tensed when the Hyuga went over to their current transmigrant, but what he did next caused their eyes to widen. Naruto Uzumaki, maybe it is time I stopped blaming fate for everything I couldn't control in my life as well as blaming Hinata-sama for my father's death. He paused, reaching up to his forehead and unwrapping the bandages he wore, revealing a green mark there. It was a small X with 2 lines going out from it. The ends of the lines were curved over. The one closest to the X on the left side was curved over the top, with the opposite end of that one curved on the bottom. The right one was the opposite of that. The end near the cross was curved over the bottom, and the other end was curved at the top. After all, even with this curse mark ensuring that I must die to protect Hinata-sama, that doesn't mean I can't live the rest of my life until then in my own way, he said to himself, before smiling a small smile. After that, he re-wrapped the bandages and bent down. The older boy picked up the unconscious blonde and placed him on his back. Neji knew that the Uzumaki, no, Naruto lived with the last Uchiha in the other boy's clan compound. Once he got there, the Hyuga placed Naruto down in front of the door to the compound, writing a letter addressed to the blonde and tucking it in his sash. He stood up and walked away then. Sasuke placed the book down on Naruto's bed. The other boy should have been back by now. The Uchiha went to go look for his friend. He was a little worried. After putting his shoes on, Sasuke opened the door of his house. While walking towards the gate of his clan compound, he couldn't help but wonder what the Uzumaki was doing. However, as he walked out of the gate, Indra spoke up. Look, Sasuke, he said, pointing at something to the left of the boy. Sasuke turned to look where his original incarnation was pointing, and gasped when he saw the very boy he was about to start looking for sitting against the gate unconscious. Naruto, he cried, rushing over to the boy and checking him over for injuries. His clothes were covered in dirt and marks, as was his face and arms, but thankfully he wasn't injured. However, he remembered that part of the Uzumaki clan's bloodline was a strong life force that allowed him to heal fast, so that didn't mean anything. Looking around with narrowed eyes, even activating his Sharingan to check for genjutsu, Sasuke sighed when he saw that they were alone. The Uchiha heir picked up his best friend. You really do attract trouble wherever you go, don't you, Yujiro Tonkachi? He scowled, before smiling slightly. That's what made him Naruto after all. The Uchiha turned around and carried him inside, intending to get the full story once the Uzumaki woke up again. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more support.